Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Finding Myself in Torah series. We're taking a little break from our regular episodes at Real Woman, Real Torah, where we take specific topics in Torah that we learn together. And here we're actually going to be focusing on different women and their stories and perspectives about how they found their own connection, personal connection to Torah, feeling a sense of belonging and ownership of their Torah learning. So today I'm so excited to welcome Chava Green, who is an old friend of mine. We met years ago when I first moved to LA. We learned together at a learning program here. And she recently finished her PhD in religion from Emory University, where she wrote a dissertation about Chassidic feminism. I was actually interviewed for her dissertation, so we have a little connection there. And since then, she's been writing and speaking about some of these ideas that she did her research on. So I'm really excited to have you here, and I'm really excited to talk about your personal journey with sort of finding your own connection to Yiddishkeit, how to define what it means to be a Jewish woman, and also explore some of the ideas that you came across in your research, the woman that you interviewed in that process. I would love to talk more with you about all of that. So welcome, Chava.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So to start, maybe you can begin by sharing, and you've already shared a lot about your life story in other platforms, so we're not going to do that again. And I can actually link in the show notes any other episodes that you've done on other platforms. And just so everyone knows, Chava also does speak publicly, so if you want to bring her to your community to speak about her story, she's happy to do that too. So just a little plug for Chava. So what I want to start with is kind of honing in on a specific anecdote that I remember you sharing about your story, and you're at some point in your journey trying to figure out what community you want to be part of within the Jewish community. So you knew you wanted to be connected to, Orthodox Judaism, but which Orthodox Jewish community do you want to connect to? And you can give us more details about the story, but at one point you were in a community where they kind of were teaching you a lot about Torah, but they were there's a limit to how much you can explore firsthand, and specifically Gemara learning is something that they kind of didn't feel was appropriate for you to be learning directly. And that was sort of a turnoff for you at that point, and you were like, okay, that's not for me. Meaning if I don't have direct access to that, then I need to find a different community. So that's just one example, but I kind of want to unpack that a little bit and use that as sort of an example of how you felt in your journey, that having direct access to the texts of Torah was so important to you in terms of you feeling like you have a place here.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess I'll start describing that experience a little bit and then kind of how it weaves into some of these points. I came from a college campus. I was studying critical theory, Western philosophy, feminist theory, and these are very complex texts, and they really stretch your ability to hold information and then to create your own arguments. And I've been in that world for 4 years, and during that time I found Judaism, and I felt that those texts were fundamentally empty of the kind of depth and soulfulness that I wanted to live my life on. And so I came to Orthodox Judaism looking for that, more, moral and authentic path. And I ended up going to seminary in Israel. I was there for 2 years, and it was a crazy time of exploring all different types of communities. And I had only been exposed to Chabad very briefly, and so I was in a kind of very mainstream Haredi environment in Israel. And I was learning more and more, and my text skills were getting better and better. And at some point I was starting to really feel I had reached this kind of pinnacle of Western culture in academia, and that's what I was learning, and I was, developing my own thoughts on it, and that's what led me to find my own path in Judaism. So now I'm in Judaism, and I want to also be accessing those complex texts that are the pinnacle of Judaism. And I remember going to a rabbi in the seminary and saying, I really want to learn further. And I understood in the regular kind of non-Chassidic Haredi world, women are not allowed to learn Gemara, and they kind of follow an older normative halakhic opinion ruling of, women are excluded from Torah study on that level. And I said to him, but you know me, that I have learned so much in the secular world. I really want to learn this in the Jewish world. And he gave me something from Pirkei Avos, and he was like, this is the Mishnah, it's the oral law, like this is, you should learn this. And he said, come back to me with like 20 questions on this, text. And I took it really seriously. I went back, I thought of all these different questions, I brought it back to him, and then we just like had this kind of schmooze about it, and like that was the end of it. And I guess what I felt was something that, during my research, my dissertation research, I spoke to Vivi Darren, who's an incredible educator in Shlocha, and she was saying the Rebbe's view was this idea that fundamentally we need to take women's intellect seriously. And that should be kind of our jumping off point from whatever we expect of them and kind of like their role in a community. And I felt like that experience with this rabbi kind of made me feel like there was some subtle element of like not really taking women's intellect seriously. Like that, I don't know if I felt like a little part of me was kind of discounted in that experience. And so that was one thread of like a lot of different pieces of why I also really wanted like a mystical aspect of Judaism, which led me to Chabad, which that community doesn't have as much. But I felt like that was really important. And then in terms of having my own connection to the text itself, I feel like, there's this whole area of Mekei Der B'Tachteinim that it happens in the realm of ideas. So we talk about Der B'Tachteinim in terms of like, using an object for a mitzvah and like Hashem's presence, like when we use the physical world. There's also an idea of taking our whole experiences and then filtering them through Torah or the other way around and bringing Hashem into that place. So when you're always learning something through a rabbi, it's always being mediated. Like you're never going to like fully innovate your own experience of what the Torah is providing you, teaching you. Does that make sense? Like there's like this thing that only you can bring, this part of you that you bring to Yiddishkeit, that when you are like reading something by yourself, there's something really creative and productive that can happen there.
I just want to like quote, there's one line I actually wrote down when I was reading your dissertation, and you wrote by putting Chassidus into the hands of women, the Rebbe opened up a feminine reading of Chassidus. Mm-hmm. So like when you're like giving it directly to them, like we're able to open it up and like unpack new meaning in it that only we can find. I want to also just clarify that this is not to like dismiss or disregard like anyone who has that shita that like there's certain areas of Torah study that are forbidden for women to learn. This is more just, again, the idea was to give an example of how, like being able to access the text directly is significant in terms of that personal journey. For sure for you it was. Yeah. So maybe like jumping off of that, maybe tell us more, I guess to go into more detail about like how for you, like engaging with text of Torah, and again, you gave sort of like a general allusion to this, how that kind of changed your conception of Jewish womanhood, which is sort of like the topic of what you've been exploring in your academically. But tell us more about like how specifically having that firsthand relationship with Torah really kind of shaped your perspective.
Yeah, sure. So I guess like fundamentally, I feel like I'm like a researcher. Like I love delving into texts and then allowing them to take me on a journey, basically. So being able to develop the text-based skills so I could learn on my own, they just opened up for me an entire world of learning and of ideas. And the thing is with learning about Jewish womanhood, like I remember listening to a class, it was, I think it was Shay's Taub, he had a class he recorded like in London, and I was listening to the class, and it was about, men and women being like Shabbos in the weekday, and it was so beautiful, and it was like this tapestry of ideas, and I loved it. But I felt like for me, based on my research, I kind of knew like all the sources he was pulling on in all of the different things he was bringing up, and it created this very kind of nuanced perspective for me. And certainly he was able to present some level of that to his audience, but on the other hand, when you only have an hour to present an idea, you have to compress it significantly. And so when I would be learning a lot about what it means to be a Jewish woman from, inspiring speakers or educators or even books in English, there was like a level of when I would hit like a question or an idea I didn't understand. If you're learning it from a secondhand source, it's very hard to kind of go use that source as a jumping point to like find out more about it. But if I'm learning a sikha from the Rebbe and there's like a part where I'm like, oh, this is an interesting idea, I go to the footnote, I find another text, then I go to that text and I'm learning that. And then within there's ideas that I look for in the mafteach and like in the, I don't know how to translate that in English, like the codex, and then I find something else. And so I feel like there's just this like huge web of information. And I love trying to put the pieces together myself. And I think that listening to educators and listening to classes about womanhood, it gave me kind of this general sense that was like, what are like the terms I'm working with? What are the ideas that I'm playing off of? Like, let's give some more examples, like details. Like, let's say mashpia makabel. So, heard this idea a lot, and I felt like, people apply it in different ways. And I think it's kind of in vogue now to talk a lot about like our experience as a women and like in relationships and like kind of the more embodied experience of being a makabel. And I love that stuff. I think it's really interesting. But I'm also interested in it on a more abstract philosophical level. And so I've been going down this route of trying to pull together tons of sources about mashpia makabel, starting off with we're not, which, is for me kind of like the classic source of that. And then I've been finding some interesting sikhas about the sun and the moon as mashpia makabel. One relates it to the oral Torah and the written Torah, mashpia makabel. And there's such a depth of the term that it takes on when you continue learning about it in different facets. And there's such an ownership over the source. And also, like, I'm coming up with new questions because I'm learning about it for so long. And then I start thinking, why? Why do we have the makabel position that seems lower than, like, what is the mechanism? What does it accomplish? What does it do? And then I'm, like, following that question further. So it's just like a flower that just keeps unfolding when I'm studying it directly.
Yeah, I had a student she's learning in a program that I run in high school here where like the girls in the program are like really learning from the source, so like they're like getting to unpack the source for themselves and like see like learn it with a chaversa, like not like the kind of like a frontal style teaching. And one student was like, when I learn in this way, like when I have a question, I actually want to know the answer to the question. I'm not just like raising my hand just to like interrupt the class, but like I really want to know. Like it bothers me, my questions. Yeah. And I was thinking about that more, like why is that? Like why would it bother her more? Like why would she care more to like actually understand, like answer her question? Mm-hmm. And I think part of it is like when you're hearing it secondhand, again, there's a lot of value to hearing somebody else who's smarter than you, wiser, has more of a bigger picture of the idea, like kind of presenting it in very beautifully for you. And like it does, there's for sure so much to gain from that. But I think there's something about it when it's like pre-chewed. So like it's already been processed by the time you're getting it. So you kind of like, you end up just kind of automatically being more passive, right? Because it's like, I don't need to chew this and like think about it and break it down for myself. So like you kind of just like let it come in, like it sounds good, and like your brain doesn't activate in that way of like really, really wanting to understand and like question it. In that way.
I was thinking of this recently as an educator because when I teach my mom or sikhas, like a lot of times they start off with a question or dibur hamaskil, and like the whole first paragraph of a mimer is usually a bunch of questions.
Right.
And I notice sometimes I teach students and the question that's not their question. So they don't really care what the answer is necessarily. Right. So then I feel like I have to set up the kind of just jump to the theme of the mimer to get them engaged. But I realize that maybe those particular questions, why is the shofar not blown on the Beis Hamikdash and Rosh Hashanah? Like maybe that isn't their particular question because they're not learning.
Question that they're all like so curious.
Yeah, exactly. I must know. I think it teaches us really something fundamental about learning Torah, is that in order to be engaged, like to get your foot in the door, you have to have a question. And to go back to what I was saying, that's being a makabel. You have to have a place of emptiness where you're like, I don't know the answer to this, to create the vacuum of wanting to know the answer. Like without that dynamic, if you're like always mashpia on the information, so to speak, like, yeah, I'm fine, I'll just like, learn a little bit, but I don't need it. Like your relationship with it is going to be way less fundamental. It's going to be like something extra in your life, not something like you must have in your life. As Jews, we do need that. So
yeah. So what's the solution to that? Because like I think about that a lot. Let's say both with teaching other people, but also with ourselves. Obviously, it's also true. But let's say with teaching, so like I feel like sometimes when I'm teaching like things in like ideas in Tanya or like just kind of deeper ideas in Chassidus that I feel like I'm giving them the answers before they have the questions.
Oh,
And it's like you said, it almost feels like it's just like echoing. Like it's not really penetrating because there's no emptiness. There's no question there.
Yeah.
I think for ourselves too, like we could be learning. I think often when we learn things that don't penetrate, it's because like it's not our question, right? So what do you think is a solution thought? Like how do you create that question, in order to like be able to really receive what you're learning in that way?
I think as an educator, like I was for bringing with Hyla Sakurnik, who also teaches high school, about this. And she was saying sometimes she pauses whatever she's teaching in class and she takes a class period to do like a Q&A. Like she has like a question box and the girls can like anonymously put questions in and stuff. And it gets them in a mode of like trying to think of like, where is something that I am like, I have like some sort of lack or like I have some sort of issue. And like starting to awaken that part of you. Because like there are a lot of girls that might go through the system and like they don't have questions because things don't bother them. Or so they think, or they go through and they have so many things that bother them, but there's no space to ask about it, or they feel embarrassed to, or they like it's like doesn't bother them enough to really care, you know. But I think that as educators, we kind of have to like kind of get where's the rub, like where's the part of them that's kind of like will get somehow like engaged. It's tricky because you don't want to like go down that route too much and then they're like complaining about things or like feeling upset about things, but I think that like we need to like figure out how to create this like opening, and sometimes, by the way, it can also just be like creating a relationship with our students in a way that they're like they get excited about what we get excited about. Like if we're really able to connect them and relate to them, then you know I can start talking about like issues in Judaism or something or about women, and you know they're kind of like, oh, this sounds like something interesting. You know, like it might not be their question, but like my passion kind of comes through, and they're like, there's something here. The last thing I'll say is that I know in my experience, there's a lot of things that I learned or heard about or was told over the course of becoming religious that like it was not the time for me to like receive that information. But it definitely was filed away somewhere. So I think like on the worst days when it's kind of like, why don't people care? I think it's really important to remember that, you know, sometimes we're planting the seeds of ideas that will take fruit, that will, you know, come to fruition later.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously true. All those things are true for ourselves too, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I think both like creating a space for us to just like, what are our questions about Yiddishkeit, you know? Because like they're there, like we have questions or things that bother us, and like giving space to like allow those things to bother us, I think was like one of the first steps. And also like knowing that it's filed away somewhere, even if like right now it doesn't feel like it's resonating. What was the middle one that you said?
Relationship.
In the relationship. Yeah. I guess that's a little different, but yeah. Yeah, I would say also one more thing that like in terms of like that, like creating that space for the questions. I think sometimes also like I think sometimes we make the mistake that like we try to like get them to kind of express their frustration or like questions about a specific topic. Like let's say it's like about I don't know, like tznius is the first thing that came to my mind, but like whatever, because I just taught that in my
like school rules or something.
Yeah, whatever it is, and then like that's gonna be like, and then right away we're like, okay, now we're gonna learn all the answers, right? I think that actually usually doesn't work, because usually like the question is so burning and so frustrating that like you can't just like come in and be like, hey, I'm filling it right away, but like I think sometimes there needs to be like we need to be doing both of those things, but not necessarily does one immediately address the other. Yeah. So I'll just like something that came to mind was like my 6-year-old started asking me these like really philosophical questions about like God and Judaism or whatever. And I'm like, I would like try to give her an answer and she would just be like, she doesn't really understand what I'm saying, right? Because it's like too complicated. Clearly, if I was a better teacher, I would know how to break it down for her. But so what I started doing was like I took this notebook and we just it's like her question book. We just like write down her anytime she has questions. We like sit down every night. We like write down all her questions, and I don't give her answers. Like we just like write down the questions, and she feels so amazing about it. Like she loves her question book. Like she's like running to write more questions and like come up with more questions. And then she's like, yeah. And then if we ever come up find an answer, then like I could write the answer in. So like randomly, like someone will say something, and she's like, oh yeah, I think my teacher answered that question.
And really cool.
Yeah, and what I realized is that like I feel like it works for that's kind of how it works for all of us in a way, is that like when we have the burning question, like we need to like have a time to like create this space for like that question and that frustration and that like what is this, like I don't understand this, And but sometimes we have to like have the patience to like with time, and that's kind of where that other idea comes in, that like we're gonna like bring information into us, and we're gonna learn stuff. Not everything we're gonna learn is gonna feel like it's immediately answering a burning question that we have, but to know that like over time, if you're creating that space, that openness, then like over time, like the different ideas you learn are going to like eventually start to shift the way you think about things, and like a lot of those questions, those gaps that you used to have, will like slowly get filled. But it's sort of this more gradual evolutionary process, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking the other day how I'm like so love being in my 30s because I feel like my 20s was such a time of like unanswered questions, like and then also not necessarily having the life experiences to kind of integrate the answers that I got. Because like you're saying, like sometimes we get the answer right away and we're like your 6-year-old is still like, still doesn't make any sense, you know?
Exactly.
Like, you need to like have the Kaylee, like the actual vessel of like life, to sometimes have those answers be coherent, like make any sense, you know? So
yeah, for sure, 100%. And yeah, like you said, like it doesn't mean we should like stop learning until it like feels directly resonant, but yeah. So what I kind of want to move into now, which is like the loaded topic, is like motherhood. So I think we've been talking very like this very idealistic way about like, yeah, we should really engage with the text and like open that sikha and follow the footnote and follow the footnote to that footnote, and then like open up every sefer on our shelf and like really go down the rabbit hole, and like, and when we do that, we really get this like really deep, intimate connection and relationship with the ideas that it really changes us, and all that sounds wonderful. But real life, and you know, thank God if you are blessed to have children, that definitely does take over your life, as it should, in a very intense way, and it really becomes a big, center of our lives as Jewish women. And I guess my question is like, how have you kind of like integrated that? If you've integrated it, doesn't have to be that you have, but if you have, like, how have you integrated that into your life now? How has that shifted for you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, definitely. So my oldest he just turned 6. So I also like have been on a journey with this. And the first few years were like really existentially challenging. Like, who am I now? And like, what's my relationship with Judaism? But I think in the past couple years, I think also having more children, ironically, like made this, we spoke about this before, like made it in a sense easier, because the answer was just like so clear. Like, this is my avoda right now. Like, my kids.
God, yes. It's like, I know what, ask me to explain why. I can't explain why. Like, having more kids made it easier for me.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm like, it doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. It just is. Like,
Well, you know the old story of like someone came to 770 and like saw the Bachrim, and then they came to the Rebbe and they were like, they had this like naivete in their eyes or something. And the Rebbe was like, yeah, that's because their life is not split. Like he was saying, like they have timinis, like they have a purity in them because they're not split doing two different things. And I sometimes feel like when we first become mothers, we're bifurcated between our self before we had kids and then our new self. And then like when you're deeper into the beautiful journey of raising a family, like you start kind of integrating and realizing like, this is what I'm doing now. And so how do I integrate? How do I find balance? How do I keep my learning during all this? One really, really crucial idea. So I have all my practical tools, but one crucial idea is allowing myself to go through seasons. I actually got this idea from Tanya Chazana from when I spoke to her on Human and Holy a long, long time ago. We spoke about having seasons in our life. And I found this like took a lot of pressure off me and also helped me not feel bad when I'm not in like a good learning flow, or if I can't learn. So like, let's say it was just Pesach and my kids are out of school for at least like 2.5, 3 weeks. And I kind of knew going into that, like, okay, like I'm not going to have my class. My chavrusas are going to go on pause. And I saw my husband showed up to shul when we were away for Pesach. He showed up to shul, grabbed a guy between Mincha Marv and starts learning a sikha with him. And I knew I'm going to go to a community, and I don't know if there's going to be women with headspace, emotional space, skills to like learn to have a chavrusa. I'm like kind of more prepared for the fact that I might like not have a partner to learn with for the next few weeks, and I might just try to pick up a sefer when the kids are asleep one night. I might just be too tired to do that after a day of cooking, and sort of allowing myself the space for like the fallow times where like I'm just let's say at the end of a pregnancy or like something like that, where it's like I'm not really engaging with the text directly. And then there's times like, since I moved to Philadelphia recently, I'm near an old chavrusa of mine, and we learn together nonstop, like all the time. And so this is like a new season where
Shout out to Yeti.
Shout out to Yeti. And so like and so this has been a really fruitful time of like growth in my Torah study. And so being able to recognize that, there's those ups and downs, has been really helpful for me emotionally. Like, okay, so this is going to be like that. But the other thing is I feel really blessed. I don't know how replicable this is for other people, but because I have this like, burning passion about womanhood in Judaism, I will just like go open a mimer because I had this idea and then I saw a source that is an answer in it, and I want to know the answer so badly, So like that question is like a real fuel for me, and as mothers we know like we do actually have plenty of time, like unless your kids are home the entire day, and like everyone has different situations, but if you have your school kids in some sort of childcare and like, or in the evening when they're all asleep and like you have, an hour of downtime, like there are ways to kind of structure your time if you want to include Torah study in that, if it becomes a priority. And like have it just be something that flows like calmly within your other things. So like Yiti and I were learning and we said, let's make this into a class. And then it was like extra incentive for me to go because it's also socializing with friends. And so there's so many layers of this, but you have to make it what works for you and also like enjoyable.
Yeah, and I think actually this is something I wanted to say before, which is that, as adults, we actually have the luxury of being able to choose what we want to learn. So like with our students, it's like we're trying to get them to like have the question, even though we're choosing the curriculum, right? But like we get to decide our own curriculum as adults. And I think like you said, like I think actually that is very replicable, what you were saying about like you have like this burning like curiosity about Jewish womanhood and feminism and all these things, and like you just really want to understand it from every angle. So like if there's like you hear about a source that's going to talk about a question, like you're going to run to learn it. And I feel like every woman has something like that. Like we have something that like a burning curiosity about something in Judaism, and just focus on that. Like that could be the thing that like there needs to be something that's like that's like this fire that's like kind of driving you to want to explore something. Like I found that specifically with like the courses that we developed on like. We did one on Hilchos Nida, one on like hair covering, like a lot of like areas of halacha which like are very, very relevant and personal for a woman, and like a lot of women just like already had this like burning curiosity about it, so it was just like natural to want to like just learn more about it and like learn everything you possibly could about this topic that's like so personal to me.
I just want to say one more thing about that, which is that also times when you have some sort of struggle in your life, that can usually be like the birthing ground for like a new question, a new area that you want to explore. Like my husband and I a few months ago, like I stopped teaching full time. He like one of his clients like stopped paying him, and all of a sudden like we have no money, and like it was really intense for like a few weeks, and we were just learning so much about bitachon and like reframing our whole experience of like lacking, what Hashem wants from us, what it means to be like, and so. I hadn't like had such deep questions about bitachon before, but like going through that experience was like, I really need this information, like it created this vacuum of like, in order to like regain my emotional stability, my calm, my trust, like I really need this information. So that was a really powerful way to like flip a, difficult moment into that,
right, that
question. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. I feel like I had that experience with like pregnancy loss. Like I did an episode on this a while back, but, yeah, like going through that experience myself, and then being like just like really wanting to understand this. I'm like, I don't know anything about this, and then we ended up putting a unit in our fertility course about it, and yeah, like there was like this. I really just wanted to understand like what is the journey of the soul, like what happens to is there a neshama, what happens to the neshama when it's never actually born, and yeah, I feel like like you said, like using those moments to like fuel our curiosity. And I love what you said about the seasons of our lives. That can be very comforting emotionally, when it's like hard to have those ups and downs. Okay. Anything else you want to share about your personal journey or relationship with Torah and like personal, sense of belonging and all that before we go on to like some of the research and the conversations you've had with like other women?
I don't know. I mean, I guess I'll say like this kind of will flow into a little bit into my dissertation topic, but like we talk a lot about using like text-based learning, and I'm very passionate about that. But I think that nowadays, like all of the access we have for podcasts and courses and YouTube videos and all this stuff, I think it's something that we really should lean into as a medium to learn and to teach in. And I think it's something, not to be discounted as like completely secondary. I think maybe I was setting up like this dichotomy of like, that's like second best to like learn that way. And then the best is like text based. But I found in those seasons when I'm not learning, like I had like a podcast every week of a sikha I would listen to in the car. And those have been like really crucial for me to like have different mediums of study.
And I think like when we're just exposing ourselves to like ideas of Torah, it also just can create those areas of curiosity for us.
Yeah.
Like you just kind of like, gets your mind thinking about those ideas. Awesome. Okay, so maybe tell us a little bit more about like the women you've encountered in your research. So I know you interviewed like a ton of specifically Chabad women, because your dissertation is specifically about Chabad women and Chassidic feminism as it is presented in the Rebbe's worldview. So yeah, maybe tell me about that, and like what was the significance. I know you shared some like really like moving stories about like women who really like reconnected to Yiddishkeit in a very powerful way through like learning the Rebbe's teachings or whatever, sources in Chassidus directly. So yeah, maybe tell us more about that.
Yeah, sure. So for my dissertation, I interviewed what I would kind of consider like maybe like the more educated class of people in Chabad, like people that are like really deeply engaged with ideas, as well as shlochas in small towns, and I even spoke to some high school students. And so I tried to get like a really broad range of women's experiences in Chabad. And what was interesting, I found in terms of their relationship to text, was I saw a few different trends. One was really interesting to me was that I felt like there were like famous sichas of the Rebbe about women. And people would use them as like a shorthand to refer to like a whole like kind of value system. So I'll give two examples. One was the Chana Sicha. So one time, I think it was when I just had my first child, and it was over Sukkot, and my husband had gone to shul, and we were in Crown Heights, and it was like really hot out. I didn't want to go outside. I was just stuck in this like apartment we were staying at for hours. And finally my husband came home and we went out to the meal, and I was sitting with these like older Chassidic women from like, very long lineage in Chabad, and like they're very regal, and they're sitting in the sukkah chatting, and I come in and I'm like this young Baal Tshuva mother, like sweating, I'm like so tired. I just plopped down and I'm like, oh, I'm so annoyed I couldn't go to shul today. And they just looked at me and they were like, no, the Chana Sicha. What do you mean? Chana stayed home. Like, what you're doing is so important. And then with that, they just like walked out of the sukkah. And I was sitting there like, just, what did they say? How did they answer my question? Like, I was like so confused.
Of course, the Chana Sicha. You should know about this.
The Chana Sicha, So, over the years, I heard more about that Sicha. I learned that Sicha inside. And then I was kind of attuned to the moments where women would reference that Sicha for like different reasons. But then I had the privilege of speaking to Vivi Darren, who I mentioned, and she was living in Crown Heights working at Beis Rivka when the Rebbe gave that Sicha. And she told me a whole side story of like the fallout from that Sicha among women in Crown Heights, and then the Rebbe's response. And it was like a whole other layer to the meaning behind it and what the Rebbe's intention was.
Oh, wait, you need to fill that in because I never heard this.
Yeah, so she said she wasn't even in shul then. Her mother-in-law had gone to shul, and she came home. She said, "You'll never believe what the Rebbe said. The Rebbe said when we have babies, we should stay home for 3 years." And she's like, "Really?" Because she had just had a baby, and she was teaching full-time in high school. So the next day, all the high school teachers at Beis Rivka got together, and they were like, "We're going to send in a letter to the Rebbe that we all resigned." Like, everyone who had a baby, we're resigning. We're going to go home and be with our Shmuel Hanavi, right? Like the Sicha said. And even the principal, I think, of one of the principals at the time, she had a newborn. So awesome. They sent this as a miktav chalali to the Rebbe, and he wrote back and he said, "I didn't mean you." Okay. So she's like, what is going on? So the way she understood it was that the Rebbe was giving in general, he was giving a general perspective on what is of value in life. And what is of value in life is not a spiritual high in the Mishkan. What is of value is that Hannah's whole being was like devoted to having, like, to fulfilling her role as a Jewish woman. She says, like, I have this womb, like, why am I not using it? You know, so it's like this, like, devotion to motherhood. But then what happens to Shmuel? She gives him up to the Mishkan. She doesn't, like, it's not like just for her. It's not in this kind of like small vision. It's like she is going to be the mother of the next Navi. So in how Mrs. Darren was describing it is like this Sikha is saying, like, we are raising up the next generation of Jews so that they should be given over to Hashem. So when all of the women at Beis Rivka, okay, they have their own baby, that's important, but they also have all of their quote-unquote babies, their students. So when he said, I didn't mean you, he's saying this is a whole, hashkafa, a whole perspective of the value of motherhood, the value of women's role in education. And, in that sikha, it's more specific. It's saying, like, a woman wants to go be exhausted working 9 to 5 so she can come home and see, I'm just as tired as my husband. Like that's the kind of twisted mentality of, like, equality being, like, work yourself like a dog that the Rebbe was against, So these talks, I kind of came at them through multiple angles. Like, what did the Rebbe say? So I learned the Sikha, I translated some pieces, I put it in. Then I kind of looked at a few layers of the, influence that these talks have had on Chabad as a whole and on individual women. And so for the Chana Sikha, for example, like, I had, what were people's reactions to it at the time? How do people use that talk now? What does it mean to them? What context do they use it in? And then, what is, like, the general vibe that this Sikha has created in Chabad that people live with, even if they're not familiar with that particular talk? So this is, like, many layers. So there's also a Sikha about Dina going out, and the Rebbe has an incredible, kind of reinterpretation of her role. And so I found on Chabad.org an article about, like, Dina being the original influencer. So a lot of, like, interesting ways of seeing how women learn their Rebbe's Sikhas and then kind of integrate them into their kind of ideas about womanhood today. Okay, I'm trying to think back to your question. Can you remind me? I want to refocus.
Yeah, I mean, the question I asked was, like, I know you spoke about, like, some women, like, really developing this very, like, rich and, like, personal and, like, emotional connection to Yiddishkeit through, like, having direct access to the talks. But something you said, actually, I want to just push you on a little bit. Where you said that, like, you feel like a lot of these, like, landmark sikhas become like a symbol of this general worldview that we have, and that a lot of people have never even learned the original talk, but they just kind of, like, are familiar with, like, the reference of, like, oh yeah, Dina was the influencer, she was the one who went out, she's a shlocha, whatever, right? Even though they've never actually, like, learned the original. So I'm just curious if you think that, I don't know, like, is it a positive thing or a negative thing, but, like, I guess what are the, upsides or downsides of that, of, like, these ideas, or these, like, very rich, like, even that Sikha about Dina, it's this very rich and, like, very revolutionary kind of perspective on Dina and analysis of who she was. I guess what's, like, upsides and downsides of them just becoming, like, this talking point, even if people don't necessarily have access or have never really explored the original source.
Well, okay, so I can answer this in, like, a lot of different ways. I think what's coming to mind now is kind of, like, what is the function of a sikha, and kind of what genre are you using it for? So if you're approaching it as kind of a experience and learning, connecting to the Rebbe through his teachings, so there's a way to learn it that's, like, really drawing out those nuances and appreciating the complexity and, like, the innovation of the Rebbe's thought. And at the end, like learning his hayra, his directive within the context of what he just built, this incredible scaffold of, like, a really important source from Tanakh. And so the hayra takes on, like, a much greater significance because you see the whole picture. On the other hand, the function of the Rebbe's Sikha, you could also step back and say, he was kind of creating the environment in Chabad of our value system. And so over generations of the Rebbe's Sikhas, his talks, like, it's kind of baked into Chabad now that, like, women have such a powerful influence outside their home. So, like, that's concept that people know about, and it's almost like referencing the Sikha gives it a little bit more of a solidity or like a source, but that idea has a life of its own, like that.
Right. And there's something really beautiful about that. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think what's important to draw out with this particular idea that we're saying is, the Parshas Emor Sikha that Batsheva, uses, like the places where the Rebbe spoke about something that did not become baked into the idea of being a Lubavitcher, of our identity, of women learning, Torah Sheba'al Peh. Like, so why didn't that? What were the barriers to like certain, and also like, recently this past year I've been learning the Nunaf Nambei Sikhas, and some of them have very powerful revolutionary ideas that for various reasons have also not become the norm in Chabad to learn or to speak about. And so I, as kind of an academic, I step back and I look at all these pieces, and I'm kind of trying to put the puzzle piece together, So, which talks do women love because it feels good and like it aligns with their personality and like their, kind of how they see themselves? Which ones maybe push them past something that they are comfortable with, And so there's a lot to be said about going back to the sources and the importance of that, and then also kind of recognizing the role they play in like the bigger picture of our identity.
Nice. That was really well said. Yeah. Well, yeah. Really appreciate that. Nice.
Oh, so you wanted to speak a little bit about the women that did go back to those sources. Yes. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, like what a difference. Yeah.
Because there was a few women who spoke about kind of reaching a point of like an impasse in their life, of kind of like, what am I doing? So one of the women, it was kind of like with her relationship with mental health and her family, and another one, it was about her shlichus drastically changing, and they were just kind of in these moments of like not being sure what the next steps were, and each one of them in that moment, they didn't necessarily go looking for the Rebbe's Sikhas as the answer, but being Chabad and being in this environment, they maybe chanced upon it, or they had an experience where they ran into an old teacher and they started learning the Rebbe's Sikhas inside. And actually, it's so interesting that both of them said something very similar. They had this quote. They said to me, like, I feel like the Rebbe is speaking to me, or I feel like the Rebbe sees me. And it was so powerful because I think one aspect of your question earlier was, what does it matter that the Rebbe spoke directly to women and girls, Neshei B'not Chabad? Because we kind of take this for granted, but it was like totally revolutionary for a Rebbe to empty out his shul and then have women fill it up, and then he would speak directly to women. That like was really in that time period very mind-boggling. Now I think like that's become the norm, that rabbis speak to women and have like women's classes and things. But the fact that the Rebbe made women the subjects of Judaism and not one of the objects of Judaism, because earlier sources, and like, okay, this is a whole long tangent I don't want to get into. This is like a big part of my research of kind of like, how did we reach this moment in history and women's roles right now? But let's just say the fact that the Rebbe spoke to women directly, it's very powerful, because it shows us that in the Rebbe's eyes, we are full subjects of Judaism, of learning, of changing the world, of making Deborah Tachtanim, all of the really important, powerful things that we can accomplish as Jews. As Jewish women, they take on a particular nuance and significance, and he spoke about what it means for us specifically to step into that power. And that's what's really incredible, because a lot of, and this really bothered me and sometimes still does, like you read something and like, even like the Beis Din of Crown Heights, for every Yom Tov, they put out a booklet of like halachas, and it'll say, everyone must X, Y, Z. And they really mean every man, because women don't do that thing. And like, it still like bothers me a little bit, because sometimes there's this sense when you talk about Jews, like you're talking about everybody, but sometimes things about Yiddish could apply to men, and sometimes they apply to women. So for these women in my talk that were kind of at this impasse, they came to the Rebbe's Sikhas, they started learning them, and they were like, the Rebbe sees me in my moment in life and is directly guiding me and creating a path forward for me. As a woman, as a shlucha, as a mother, as an educator, as a human being, like all of those pieces integrated not like, you know, one piece over here, one piece over there, but like creating this like holistic view. And that's like, I have to say that was what writing this dissertation was for me, was to like come to Rebbe's sichas and see so many parts of myself reflected in like the Rebbe's view of womanhood. You know, like every piece of me was kind of like seen and validated, and like it was really beautiful.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, I have so much to say about what you just shared. But first of all, just like that idea, like what you said, I remember you describing that, how like the woman felt like the Rebbe was talking to them. And I think like that's sort of the power of like actually reading the words of a text. Is that you can have that experience of like this, like whoever it is who's the author of this text is talking to me. And I think maybe more generally with Torah as a whole, like having that experience of like Hashem is talking to me, right? It's not just like, it's not being like mediated by somebody else, but like when I'm opening up the Torah, when I'm opening up the Sefer, like Hashem is talking directly to me. And I think that's like such a powerful experience that we all could have access to. Another thing, and what you were saying about like the Rebbe speaking directly to women, and I think another like really revolutionary thing, actually, when I interviewed Dr. Susan Handelman a few years ago, she spoke about this, how like, you know, the Rebbe be emphasizing a lot like having women's pictures like on the kids magazine, making their sure there's a boy and a girl and things like that, but also that like when he would write letters, he would write to B'nai U'B'nais Yisrael, right? Like which like historically we always use the word B'nai Yisrael to mean like it's a gender neutral term to refer to like the entire Jewish nation, right? Like you don't need to write B'nai Yisrael. It's B'nai Yisrael means everybody, right? Yeah. And like it was such a like progressive almost like kind of thing to do, to like have to write and B'nai Yisrael, right? And I think like if the Rebbe hadn't done it, like one of us would do that, everyone would be like mocking us, you know, like what do you mean? Obviously we mean the woman too, like come on, you know. And like why was Rebbe so particular about that? About like, no, like it's like make sure everyone knows I'm talking to you. Like I'm not talking to your husband for him to transmit it to you. I'm talking directly to you.
Yeah.
And I think that's just like, to me, is like so telling of this whole idea of like kind of what you wrote about, of like what, you know, the Rebbe sort of wanting women to have this direct contact with Torah, like experiencing it firsthand, like this firsthand, you know, receiving of the Torah.
I have a beautiful story of this from like right in the opening of my talk. I was speaking to Mrs. Gorelick from Italy, and she said that when she was newly married, so now we're going back to what, the 50s, 60s, like she was newly married, and she said that the Rebbe sent a letter to her husband. I think it was in Yechidus. He said, learn chitas mit the balabasta. Learn chitas with your wife. The Rebbe said to her husband. And she said what struck her about that was not teach your wife chitas, but learn it with her. She said, why does my husband need to learn it with me? Like, he knows chitas by himself. Like, we don't need to like learn it together. You know, I'm not helping him. But she said he said it that way because he wanted to put us on equal par. We're learning it together as equals. And I think that this is part of like the Rebbe's whole idea. He says something so interesting in a few different, like, you know, Jem has a few different videos of this where he says like Chassidism, you know, was always about equal rights for women. And it's such a wild statement because you think like, what does he mean equal rights? Like there's so many things in Yiddishkeit where we're not equal, like we don't do the same thing. But that was his point. He was not talking about equality as being the same thing. He was talking about the Rebbe really, really valued men and women's avodas Hashem on the exact same plane. Like one was not greater than the other. If anything, he sometimes valued the women's avodas Hashem more. Like at least in his talks, he'll sometimes say there's like a unique quality to women's avodas Hashem. But yeah, I think that this direct access and that we need to see ourselves through the Rebbe's eyes, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so maybe what we can shift into now is, do you notice any, like, I guess from what you've seen in your personal experience and people you've interviewed, like, do you see any gaps in terms of, like, where women don't feel a sense of, like, belonging in Torah or in Yiddishkeit? And maybe if you don't mind, I'll just, like, share another anecdote that I heard from you, where one time you called, I don't remember why we were talking on the phone, but you called me and you were saying how in the community that you were in, the community was producing a kibitz, like a collection of like essays, basically from just people in the community, and they would be like publishing it. And you innocently were like, you wrote an email back being like, sure, I would love to publish something. And they were like, no, actually, this is specifically for men. So maybe just share that story a little bit. And the reason why I'm sharing the story is more like just to explore that experience and what that might tell us about like gaps that there might be in terms of like where women might feel like they don't have a place in like their contribution to Torah, and like what's our response to that. Like some of those things might be like valid and like should be that way, or are there things that we could do to kind of fill those gaps in other ways? So yeah, let's explore that a little bit.
Sure, yeah. So this was a really fascinating whole sugya in my research, the Kovetz Haaretz, which yes, I had never heard of until I got that email. And so, yeah, so it's interesting. I asked him 2 questions in the email back. I said, could women submit, and could it be in English? And so he wrote back to me and said, no, this is for younger light and Bachrim in yeshiva. And for English, he said, ask the organizer if people can submit in English. And so I turned to one of the rabbis in the yeshiva that my husband went to in our local community, and I said, I just don't know what this is. Like, can you fill me in? So he explained it's like a collection of essays, like sort of scholarly essays on a Torah topic that the Bachrim produce in yeshiva, and then they put it together as a booklet every year. And I thought that was, beautiful. And so I was thinking, could women put this together? Could they do this in a girls' high school? I had this kind of idea, this question, that I just pressed pause on. And in my dissertation, I took it down a different line of, inquiry. But then a year later, I was reading, I don't know where it was, in Der Hair or something, and I saw that there was a Rabbi Hecht in, I think, somewhere in Massachusetts. He passed away, and one of his students wanted to create a kovetz in honor of him. And so they wrote in a letter to the Rebbe, and they asked, would it be appropriate for the kovetz to include women and for have it to be in English? And I was like, those are my exact 2 questions. That is so interesting. So I didn't know the answer, but I knew a Rabbi Hecht. I didn't know how he was related, but I was like, I'm just going to message him and find out. So I messaged him. I was like, do you know about this kovetz? He's like, I think maybe that was his uncle. He's like, sure, I have a copy if you want to see it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I do. So he came over, and he did not leave it for me. He's like, this has not ever been republished. I cannot lose this. You can look at it for an hour, and then I'm going to pick it up. So I went through the kovetz, and it was so interesting. So it was 2-sided. So the front side was English, and the back side was Hebrew. And the front side in English was a very kind of creative, diverse array of essays that were submitted. Some of them were memories of this Rebbe Hecht. Some of them were stories and topics in Torah that his students had learned from him. Men and women of all different ages. It was really, really beautiful. And then I turned to the back side, and I was reading through the Hebrew, which my like kind of modern Hebrew is not great. But it was a much shorter part. There was like maybe 8 of them. They were all written by men, and they were like way more like complex and directly related to like, topics in Gemara or something like that. So it was really interesting experience because I kind of saw, that there was a different style in the kovetz when it was in English and by women than like the kind of scholarly quality of it when it was written in Hebrew, and like the topics were different. So fast forward a few years, and I was teaching at a Chabad girls' high school, and one of my students came up to me and said, in memory of someone who had passed away, she's like, I want to make a kovetz with all the girls. And I was so excited. I'm like, this is my dream coming true, like a woman's kovetz, like this is, let's do it. But so as the year progressed and the girls were submitting some things, I just saw that they did not have the kind of training to produce these scholarly articles that the boys in the yeshiva had. And so what they submitted, some of them were really beautiful, but the majority were creative types of writing, which have their value and they're extremely important, and especially for young people to be thinking about and integrating ideas in Torah in their own experiences is really crucial. But it really does not mimic the kovetz. Like it's really be a kind of different type of publication. But one girl did submit a very long kind of exposition on Tanya, which was very cool. So I saw that like there's a potential for this. And so you were telling me that your students are putting together something like this now. Which is really cool. So I think that the main gap that we have right now in women's education, and I'm going to say this as someone who did not go through the whole system, and I do not have a ton of experience or exposure to different high schools, whatever. But I do have a general sense that there isn't necessarily like we're not like creating a pathway for young women who are really passionate about learning and they have a more intellectual bent that would have place to express that and to develop their own ideas in Torah. And an example of that, this past weekend, I was in Crown Heights, and someone connected me to another woman, a Chabad woman who's getting her PhD. And I had dinner with her and her husband. My husband and I went to meet them, and she was telling me about her research, and it's like early modern ethical literature from like Muslim movement stuff, and she's like studying all these different commentaries, and it was so interesting. She's talking to me about this, but where is she doing this work? Like in an academic program, because there's nowhere for her to do this work in a Jewish environment, at least not in Chabad. So I think that we're hopefully going to see over the next decade or whatever, like we need to create more pathways for women who want to be creating and innovating in ideas in Torah, like a space for them to do that.
Nice. And what's the impact of that? Like meaning, like like all this learning and like all this emphasis we're putting on text-based learning, like I feel like what's the goal? The goal is really for like women to feel the sense that like Yiddishkeit's ours, like it belongs to us. We're not like outsiders. We're not spectators.
Sure. I mean, it's kind of asking like, what's the goal of a man being kollel? To become a rabbi? Okay, to learn. It's just part of being Jewish, like just part of like like someone who loves learning. Like, why do they need a particular reason to continue learning?
Right.
The difficulty is when you don't have any structure, any support system to do that in. And so that's kind of what I'm talking about. Like let's create some more of those structures. But like there are so many women who love learning that just continue learning, and they just maybe as individuals they have more of a capacity to be self-motivated or something like that. But I think as a community, when we show that this is value and we are going to create a path for that, that's very impactful for women to see. Like there's a future if I want to go down that path, and and use it to become an educator or to maybe create curriculums in high schools or in seminaries. Like there are so many ways that this can just infuse our community with more higher level learning and connection to Yiddishkeit.
Yeah, and I think just going back to the kibitz, idea that you spoke about, because I remember having the same feeling where, like, I remember seeing a kibitz that was put out by yeshiva, and these were, like, 16, 17-year-old, yeshiva boys who had written these, like, really in-depth, like, brilliant, I mean, like, really incredible, essays, and I remember thinking, like, I can't even imagine a girl that age like having the confidence to write something like that, like feeling like I can like write this like scholarly essay on Chassidic. Like, do I even have the like I don't even think they would feel like that's something they can do. I remember like also having this ambition of like I want to create a world where like girls feel like they can write something on that level, and it could be a separate kibitz, doesn't have to be mixed with the men's one for tznius reasons or whatever. But we should be able to like number one, provide education and the training, like you said, but also like a sense of like normalizing that this is something that the girls can do. I think it would be so impactful. So yeah, like you said, I guess somewhat on that level. The girls in my class that I'm learning with now, we are hopefully putting out a journal with all of their best writing pieces from this year. But yeah, it's something I definitely would want to see more of. Yeah, and I think also when you brought up that story in your dissertation, I remember you also referenced that sikha, which I, quoted in the intro to this series about, women having access to all of Torah, right? And like all of Torah being something which we can connect to. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit more? Like how you saw that?
Yeah, sure.
The idea of that sikha playing in.
So when I reached out to our rabbi and through the yeshiva, and he actually said, the reason why women don't write in the kibitz is because women and men, their Torah study is essentially different. It's like putting together apples and oranges. It's like two different types, and so they're not supposed to be together. And then he referenced the sikha. So I was like, great, this is what I was doing in my research. When people brought up sikhas in everyday life conversations, then I would use that as kind of like a door to walk into. Like, oh, so now what is he referencing? What is like the deeper element of this? So I went to that sikha and I started learning it. And what's been so incredible is that I've learned the sikha like probably like 10 times maybe, like over the past few years. Every time I go back to it, I see deeper and deeper layers of the Rebbe's analysis. So we have like the basic idea, which is that if women were given the Rosh Tevos, like the headings of Torah, first they were spoken to first at Har Sinai. Then what were they? It was said to them in a gentle voice. And then the third idea is that they received the topics, like the topic headings. And the general idea of the Sikha is that the Rebbe says, what does that mean they were given topic headings? The topic headings are like seeds. They contain within them everything that's going to emerge in that topic. And so in that way, we see that the women's relationship to Torah is essential. They were given the essence of the Torah, and an essence, by definition, includes everything which will later emerge from it. And that's the Rebbe's takeaway, I think, from that talk. But if we look a little bit deeper into the Sikha, one thing that I've done is I've created this, actually, maybe we can link it here. I'm going to create a PDF, like a guided learning for women if they want to learn this for Shavuos, to learn the Sikha on a much more, I would say, kind of organized and structured level. Because part of what I think the Sikha does, if you want to learn it in a more scholarly way, is that it sets up two competing narratives of women's relationship to learning and women's intellectual capacities. We have the Mechilta and the Midrash Rabbah. And what I have is I kind of have this, this chart of all these different ideas, and then what does the Mechilta say and what does the Midrash Rabbah say? And over again, their answer kind of reflects their underlying bias about women and their abilities. Throughout the entire Sikha, the Mechilta says, women receive the topic headings because they're connected to essence. And that's why they received it first. And this was necessary for the Torah to continue throughout all generations. That's like his underlying premise. The premise of Midrash Rabbah is that women were given the headings because they could not understand more than that. And so his whole view of his underlying bias about women is that their relationship with Torah is secondary to men's, and so they were given a kind of diluted version because they just need to have a more simple relationship to Yiddishkeit. And the Rebbe fleshes out both of these perspectives, and then at the end he makes a really compelling argument why the Mechilta's view that women have an essential relationship to Torah is actually the more appropriate viewpoint when we look at how Torah was given as a whole. Because Hashem gave the whole Torah that could be kind of condensed into the Aleph of Anaichi, and for sure into the first two commandments, right? And we don't say he gave that to the Yidden because they couldn't understand the rest. Like, that wouldn't make any sense. Obviously, he was about to give them the rest. So then why did he start off with like a little piece? Like, why would that be the way Hashem gave the Torah at all? So the Rebbe explains that's the way that an educator has to begin, which is that you give something that's kind of the initial concept with the intention that your student will ultimately, in the end, like finally receive everything that you want to give. But you have to start off with just the core idea, just that little first spark that like opens them. And so that's how Hashem gave the Torah in general to all the Jewish people. And so the Rebbe says certainly that's how he gave it to the women. So, and then at the end of that, the Rebbe says like a lot of really interesting things about kind of how we see women's essential connection to Judaism manifest in a number of different places, like in matrilineal descent in Judaism, and in Jewish identity in different places. And so, you know, I see the Sikha as a really fundamental way of understanding the difference between men and women's avodas Hashem in general, as the difference between essence and revelation. Because if a woman's avodas Hashem is essential, it's something very deep, to go back to the idea of seasons, it sometimes manifests begiloi, like it comes out in a revealed way, and women learn all sorts of different things. But sometimes there are seasons where women's relationship to Hashem, to Torah, is essential, and they're passing it on to their children in a very simplified way. And both of those experiences are actually like part of this holistic whole.
Wow. Very cool. Very well said.
I love this talk. I'm like obsessed with this sikha. I'm like,
Yeah, I know. I can't believe. Yeah, I'm so happy
so
we
good.
share this passion.
Yeah.
There's excitement for it. Yeah. Um, okay. So maybe I'll end off two final questions. One is share an idea. Maybe the one you just shared is it already, but I was gonna say share an idea that like you can't unlearn. Like it's something that like just completely shifted the way you see yourself, the way you see your world. Like it's really like become a part of you in a very deep way, in a way that like you really feel like this is mine.
Yeah. Sure. So last year when I was like really seriously learning the Nanaf based sikhas, the Rebbe, a theme that the Rebbe has throughout those talks is that when we say Galus and Geula are the same, the only difference is the Aleph in Geula. What does that mean is that when we're in a Galus experience, when we're in Galus in general, like we are now, and then in our day-to-day life when we go through moments of like disconnect from our neshama, from let's say maybe our spouse, from a kid, for like some sort of disconnection, that in and of itself is actually the keli to bring in the Aleph of Hashem and to then experience it as Geula. And so now in my life, like, I'm just always like, I just see everything kind of differently now. It's been a really, really transformative idea for me. So, you know, I've been trying to get an academic job and it's like not happening. I've gotten one rejection after the next. Trying to publish my book, one rejection after the next. It's been like really confusing. Like, what should I do next? And I'm just like experiencing it not as such like a deep existential thing of like I'm lacking or something. Like I'm like those ideas aren't even rising to the surface. I'm just kind of seeing it as like for some reason Hashem is giving me what looks like a gullus experience of like being rejected over and over. Somehow this is a keli to enter into some sort of geula right now. And so I don't know the mechanism of how it's going to happen, but I'm like waiting for it to happen. Like I know that the whole point of Gullus is to be in Geula. So now so many different moments in my life are like shifted into this new kind of way of seeing things. And I think I love how you put that. Like I can't unsee it.
I love it. Amazing. Okay, final question is there a learning suggestion, like an underrated, like safer or text or whatever, that you think that women might not know about or might like think is not for them, but like you think like they could actually really love?
Okay. A million things come to mind, but for some reason, one thing that came to mind, like a few years ago, my husband and I bought the Steinsaltz Gemara. It's the one translated into English. It has like pictures. It has explanations. A beautiful like kind of commentary running throughout the whole thing in the English side. And I had studied Gemara with you for a Bat Sheva learning program. And shortly after that time, I got married. Then I had my first kid. Then I started working, and I like never really was able to get back into Gemara study because I didn't really have those like enough of the skills I felt. But something that I've been doing before different Yom Tovim or like just in the evening, I'll just open up this edition of the Gemara, and it's so accessible and it is so fascinating. And you know, I don't know if I'm not gonna like judge how I learn it, but I kind of learn it like I'm reading a book. Like I'm not necessarily trying to like wrap my mind around every complex idea, but more like letting the ideas just wash over me. And then like fascinating concepts will come up and I just really enjoy it. I remember like a while back I was doing this and I saw a whole part about Purim, and it was about this one personality in the Gemara, and he was going to like different Purim Sudas, and he gets to one and he's like, I'm full, and the host says, no, you always have room for dessert. And I was just like, and I circled it and put it on my WhatsApp status. I'm like, I cannot believe it says this in the Gemara. Like, oh
my gosh,
you always have room for dessert. It was great. So
that's amazing.
Like, I think a lot of women might think, you know, oh yeah, like it's so great Bat Sheva has Gemara courses. It's not really for me, you know. But I think like lowering the bar of what it means to study Gemara, I think that so many women would start realizing it's just a rich, incredible text. It is so interesting. There's so many stories also, and like that Parshas Emor Sicha, what does the Rebbe say? Like start off with Ein Yaakov. Like women should start off with concepts that are enjoyable, that are even narrative maybe. So I'll just I'll just say that. And then as an appendage, there's a very interesting semi-academic book that came out recently called The Mad Woman in the Rabbi's Attic. I think her name is Gila Fine, the author. And she lives in Israel. I think she might be Datilumi. She takes like a number of different women that appear in the Gemara and gives like almost a psychological take on kind of how they're perceived by in the text itself and then by Mefarshim. And it might be a little academic for some people, but I really enjoyed that book, and it also kind of gave me another appreciation for thinking about, kind of how Gemara shapes some of the ways that we view things.
Wow, very cool. So interesting. I don't think I've ever like really learned Steinsaltz Gemara in that way. So cool. That's like I'll
Like
definitely think about that. Yeah, a little life hack, exactly.
Yeah.
Just open it up leisurely and just, read it on your couch. Love it. Chava, thank you so much. This was really fascinating conversation, and I feel like we touched on a lot of things I didn't even think that we were going to go there.
Yeah.
So it was really fun and just enjoyable just to chat again. And yeah, I hope everybody who's listening enjoys it. And I just want to put a little plug that if you are listening to this and you want to find out more about what we do and get more involved, you can go to our website, betchavalearningcenter.com. And if you just want to educate yourself more about the topic of women's Torah study, we just put out a book, a compilation of sources, halachic, hashkafic, and historical records of learned women. So really just exploring the topic of Torah study really in depth. So it's an incredible book that you should go on our website and buy. So just a little plug for that. Chava, thank you. And looking forward to seeing you guys in our next episode.